Hello, I'm Joanna Cohn, Director of the Institute for Global Tobacco Control, and I am so thrilled to welcome you to today's Innovations in Tobacco Control seminar. Our guest today is Larissa Al-Uar, a leading tobacco control advocate from Jordan and co-founder of Tobacco Free Jordan. Her work has contributed to national policy development, including Jordan's National Tobacco Control Strategy. Tobacco Free Jordan's work on mapping retailers around schools in Amman led to policy changes and stricter implementation of the ban on tobacco sales within 250 meters of schools. Tobacco Free Jordan has been recognized with multiple awards, including a 2020 World No Tobacco Day Award. Larissa Al-Uar serves on the Tobacco and Nicotine Products Committee at the Jordan Standards and Metrology Organization. She is also a co-author of the Jordan Tobacco Industry Interference Index, and she has served on the WHO FCTC Article 2.1 expert group, a body established at COP10 to identify and analyze forward-looking tobacco control measures aimed at ending the tobacco epidemic. Now, Larissa is an alumna of the Institute for Global Tobacco Control's multiple programs, I think every one. She has been through the second Eastern Mediterranean Tobacco Control Leadership Program. She successfully completed our certificate program in global tobacco control in 2022. She was one of the few members of our Scholars Program cohort in 2022-23, and she's now serving as a mentor for our Ascend Leadership Program. So we are so grateful to Larissa for all those contributions, and really thrilled that she's here with us today to discuss her experiences as part of the WHO expert group on forward-looking tobacco control measures. Larissa, over to you.
Thank you, Joanna, for this very kind introduction, and good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everybody. Yes, it has been quite a privilege to be part of all these programs at Johns Hopkins, because they actually expanded our knowledge and led to getting to know so many people with vast expertise in tobacco control all over the world, and create a network that is quite essential in our work in tobacco control. I just want to take a few minutes and talk about Tobacco Free Jordan, how it came along. So my background is dentistry. I'm a professional dentist, and I stumbled into tobacco control. Okay, I was always anti-tobacco and anti-smoking, but 15 years ago, it all started by attending a birthday party with my little daughter. She was 4 at the time, and somebody started smoking, although it was outdoor, but I was really annoyed that people would smoke around little kids. So we had, between two brackets, a fight at the event, and the lady who was smoking was asked to go outside and smoke outside of the event premises. So this led to the formation of a page called Women Against Indoor Smoking, which my friend who was also at the birthday started. And from there, more and more interest was on that Facebook page, and we got contacted by a leading member of the Jordanian community, who gave us access to his hotel with free access to room and catering, just to start talking to people. And from here, Tobacco Free Jordan started. It started with 7 mothers who are very committed in tobacco control in Jordan, and with the core idea, or the core thing that we wanted to do, is to protect our children from the harms of smoking, from exposure, and from initiation. And today, what started out as a very small movement is now we have over 1.2 million followers on Facebook. And we moved from being a small-scale national movement to having presence on the global platform, which is really amazing. So that's the short introduction. And now I will start my talk on our main topic, beyond current policies, forward-looking measures for tobacco control. So before diving into forward-looking measures, I will briefly set the stage by revisiting the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control as the foundation of global tobacco control. I will then highlight why forward-looking measures are needed at this particular moment, especially in light of evolving industry tactics and uneven implementation across parties. This brings us to Article 2.1, which explicitly enables parties to go beyond the convention, an often underutilized but strategically important provision. I will also reflect on COP10 in Panama, where the decision was adopted to establish an expert group on forward-looking measures. From there, I will briefly clarify the distinction between working groups and expert groups, and why some parties show a clear preference for working groups, an important dynamic in understanding how decisions are shaped at the COP level. This will then lead us into the core focus of today's lecture, forward-looking measures in tobacco control. So the Framework Convention in Tobacco Control was adopted in 2003 and entered into force in 2005. It is the first global public health treaty, and today has 183 parties, making it one of the most widely embraced international health agreements. The governing body of the convention is the Conference of the Parties, or the COP, which convenes every 2 years. The COP is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the convention, adopting decisions to strengthen its effectiveness, and coordinating international efforts to reduce tobacco use. It serves as the central platform where parties review progress, address emerging challenges, and collectively shape the future direction of global tobacco control. So, the convention consists of 38 articles structured across 4 main pillars: demand reduction, supply reduction, key provisions, and institutional and cross-cutting measures. Demand reduction measures, Articles 6 to 14, form the core of tobacco control. These are reflected in the Empower strategies that most of us work on, and they are often the most visible to the public. Supply reduction measures, Articles 15 to 17, address issues such as illicit trade, sale to minors, and alternative livelihoods. There are also critical cross-cutting provisions, including Article 5.3 on industry interference, very important article that draws a lot of attention, and where we have every year, or now every 2 years, the Tobacco Interference Index, where we measure how much the industry interferes in decision-making, and Articles 9 and 10 on product regulation and disclosure, which is usually the most interesting part of the COP when we attend it. We look at how parties react, and we see there's always lots of talk about this one in particular, which underpin the effectiveness of other measures. Finally, Article 20 to 38 cover research, reporting, cooperation, and the governance of the convention. Most importantly, this structure represents a minimum framework, and this is where Article 2.1 becomes central, as it explicitly enables parties to go beyond these baseline obligations. While progress has been made, the implementation of Empower measures still varies widely, with some countries achieving high levels of implementation, while others continue to face structural, technical, and resource-related challenges. Strengthening implementation of existing measures still remains essential. At the same time, COP discussions have consistently highlighted that the tobacco industry continues to evolve, adapting its strategies to interfere with both the development and implementation of tobacco control policies. This creates a dual imperative. On one hand, we must continue to support and strengthen the implementation of core FCTC measures, particularly those reflected in Empower, such as taxation, smoke-free environments, packaging and labeling, and advertising tactics. On the other hand, we must also expand and extend our policy approaches to address emerging challenges and close existing gaps. This is precisely the role of Article 2.1, to enable and encourage parties to go beyond current measures while continuing to build on what already exists. The Convention is often described as a floor for tobacco control, not a ceiling. This is grounded in Article 2.1, which encourages parties to go beyond the minimum requirements of the Convention. But Article 2.1 should not be read in isolation. It must be understood in conjunction with the objective of the Convention itself, which is to protect present and future generations from the devastating health, social, environmental, and economic consequences of tobacco use. The Convention calls on parties to reduce tobacco use and exposure continually and substantially. And this is exactly where Article 2.1 becomes critical. It provides the policy space and flexibility for parties to take stronger, more innovative action over time. In other words, Article 2.1 operationalizes the ambition of the Convention's objective. It allows us to move from implementing what is required to continuously strengthening our response to the tobacco epidemic. COP10 marked an important turning point. Parties adopted a decision to establish an expert group specifically on forward-looking tobacco control measures within the scope of Article 2.1. The mandate of this group was very clear: to identify and describe measures that go beyond existing approaches and that expand or intensify tobacco control efforts as they apply to tobacco products. A key point here is to note that parties differ in their definition of tobacco products. The expert group was tasked with grounding its work in existing party experiences, available evidence and literature, and any other source of information that it might find appropriate. It was also mandated to produce a report to COP11, which would then inform further discussions and potential action by parties. In addition to establishing the expert group, the COP also requested the Convention Secretariat to play a key enabling role, setting up the expert group. So first, the Secretariat was tasked under the guidance of the Bureau to develop the terms of reference for the expert group and facilitate its establishment. The expert group should consist of up to 12 experts with relevant technical experience and, importantly, have regional balance, as well as the inclusion of civil society expertise by including up to 2 observers from civil society organizations with an observer status to the COP. Technical knowledge and support, the Secretariat was further asked to engage knowledge hubs, and we reached out to the knowledge hub in Australia about legal issues, and they provided a report also about what is to be expected when we implement those forward-looking measures, and invite the World Health Organization to provide technical support. The Secretariat provided logistical and operational support by making the necessary administrative and budgetary arrangements and facilitate the work of the group, including through virtual communication. So overall, the Secretariat played a central role, not in shaping the content, but by enabling the process through which these forward-looking measures were developed. So, before moving further into forward-looking measures, it is really important to briefly clarify the distinction between working groups and expert groups, as this shapes how policies are developed within the COP process. And I personally experienced the lack of clarity on this point at my first COP and noticed that I was not the only newbie that faced this. Under the convention, the COP can establish different types of subsidiary bodies to support its work. A working group is composed of party representatives, typically government delegates, who participate through a nomination process by the parties. These groups are inherently intergovernmental. In contrast, an expert group is composed of technical specialists with recognized expertise in specific fields such as legal, scientific, or economic. It is important to know that experts serve in their individual capacity as experts, not party representatives. Their role is to provide independent, evidence-based analysis, technical input, and policy options. Both types of groups report to the COP and contribute to the development of guidelines, recommendations, and policy tools. However, the distinction becomes important in practice. Some parties tend to favor working groups because they ensure direct government control over the process and outcomes, while at the same time, expert groups are perceived as more independent. This is the expert group established following the COP10 decision. It brought together 14 experts from across the 6 WHO regions, ensuring both technical diversity and geographic representation. The group was chaired by Matthew Allen, with Becky Freeman and Jeffrey Fong serving as the vice chairs, and supported technically by Janet Chung Hall from the ITC project at the University of Waterloo. The work of the group was conducted through a series of 3 meetings, 2 virtual and 1 in-person meeting in Helsinki, combining both technical discussions and collaborative development of the inputs. But it wasn't just these 3 meetings. The subgroups were meeting continuously, sometimes on a weekly basis. There were emails coming and going nonstop. With the time zone differences, you would wake up and find like 10 or 20 emails on one topic, but discussing a certain point, how things need to be rephrased. So it might seem that we didn't work a lot, but I have to say we worked a lot, and it was quite an enriching experience working with many people from different backgrounds and having to work in a different way, because if I talk about myself, I advocacy. I use the advocacy language. So one of the things that I would always get back, change the language, no advocacy language. So this was one of the very important points, that it is not advocacy. We are here to provide technical references, knowledge. So we couldn't, so advocacy language was one of the prohibited things. And I think that the group, it was being from different backgrounds, really led to the enrichment of the discussions. And what I've heard, that this group was actually very harmonious for the first time, and there was literally no disagreements about things. We all saw eye to eye, and this gives a true value to the work that we have been doing. So, to ensure a structured and credible approach, the expert group developed a set of clear criteria to guide the selection of forward-looking measures. First, in terms of mandate and scope, measures had to apply to tobacco products within the scope of the convention, and importantly, expand or intensify existing WHO FCTC measures and guidelines. Second, on evidence and feasibility, measures needed to be supported by research, modeling, or country experience, or at minimum, grounded in a strong conceptual foundation. Third, regarding impact potential, measures were expected to demonstrate the ability or strong potential to reduce tobacco use and nicotine addiction. And I put 3 lines and stress nicotine addiction. Benefit vulnerable and hard to reach populations, and influence policy, market, and regulatory environments. These criteria were designed to ensure that the selected measures are relevant, actionable, and impactful across different country contexts. Non-selection of a measure does not imply a lack of merit. It simply reflects prioritization for the purpose of developing the initial set of information briefs. So, what we see here is not a closed list, but a carefully curated starting point. Beyond the criteria themselves, the expert group adopted a deliberately inclusive selection approach. The aim was to ensure that forward-looking measures provide relevant options for parties at different stages of implementation and include measures with varying levels of complexity and readiness. At the same time, strong emphasis was placed on global applicability. The selected measures were designed to be relevant across all income levels, including low, middle, and high income countries. The group also ensured comprehensive coverage, addressing all forms of tobacco use, rather than focusing on a single product category. Importantly, this work aligns with Article 5.2b of the Convention, which obliged parties to prevent and reduce tobacco consumption, nicotine addiction, and exposure to tobacco smoke. So, the intention here was not to create a one-size-fits-all model, but to provide a flexible menu of policy options that can be adapted to different national contexts. So, the selection of forward-looking measures followed a structured and iterative process. The expert group began with a long list of around 40 potential measures, drawn from existing evidence, country experiences, and emerging policy ideas. This was then refined to a short list of 23 measures based on criteria we just discussed. Finally, this was further narrowed down to a set of 16 measures, which were developed into detailed information briefs. What's important here, that this was a process of prioritization, not exclusion. This slide presents the 16 forward-looking measures identified and prioritized by the expert group. Rather than looking at them individually, it is helpful to understand them as a comprehensive policy package organized across 4 key domains. Tobacco supply. The first group focuses on reducing availability and access to tobacco products. This includes measures such as retail reduction, tobacco-free generation policies, raising the minimum legal age, and even phasing out sales over time. These are measures that directly shape the retail environment and limit access, particularly for young people. The second group is the institutional structure or market, and it targets the structure and power of the tobacco industry itself. This includes ending government support for tobacco farming, reducing industry profits and higher pricing power, and more structural approaches like a sinking lid on supply. These measures shift the focus from individual behavior to market regulation and industry accountability. The third group is product regulation. It focuses on making tobacco products less addictive and less appealing. This includes reducing nicotine content, banning flavors and additives, limiting brand variants, and banning cigarette filters. These measures directly target the product design strategies used by the industry. The fourth one are the measures that focus on protecting individuals from exposure, including expanding smoke-free environments, addressing second and third-hand smoke exposure, including in private and semi-private spaces. These measures go beyond traditional tobacco control. They aim to reshape the environment, the market, and the product itself. They represent a shift from controlling tobacco use to transforming the system that sustains it. Taken together, these measures reflect what a true endgame approach to tobacco control could look like. So, after all this, last November, the COP convened, COP11 in Geneva. At the COP11, parties engaged in substantive discussions on forward-looking measures, which ultimately led to the adoption of the decision on Article 2.1. A key point of convergence was the understanding that forward-looking measures are not obligatory. And this was one point that was really discussed by the parties and emphasized by them. They are presented as additional voluntary policy options that parties may consider in line with the national context, priorities, and legal frameworks. This clarification was important in building consensus. At the same time, the diversity of measures included in the list also played a role in facilitating adoption. Many parties recognized that they were already implementing some of these measures, even if not explicitly framed as forward-looking pledges. This helped to reduce resistance and position FLMs as an extension to existing efforts rather than a completely new, burdensome agenda. At the same time, it was acknowledged that in many settings, core empower measures are still not fully implemented. This reinforces an important message. Forward-looking measures are not a substitute for implementation. They are a complementary pathway to strengthen and accelerate tobacco control efforts. Their adoption reflects not obligation, but growing openness among parties to explore more ambitious approaches. And I think what played here a major role that when we, for example, pointed out that retail restriction around schools was also already in place in our area, for example, parties were looking at forward-looking measures at the beginning as something from outer space. But when we, as observers to the COP, as NGOs, and we interacted directly with parties, when we started showing them what we already had on the ground, they voted in favor of its implementation. So, to illustrate how forward-looking measures translate into practice, I selected 3 examples, each highlighting a different dimension of these policies. The first is birth date-based sales restrictions, often referred to as tobacco-free generations. At its core, this policy permanently restricts access to tobacco for individuals born after a certain date, regardless of when they reach adulthood, thereby preventing initiation, not delaying it. We are now seeing real policy momentum in this one. The United Kingdom just recently adopted this approach. The Maldives and several jurisdictions in Massachusetts are already applying it. And this measure closely aligns with several provisions of the convention. For example, we have Article 4.2b, which calls for measures to prevent the initiation of tobacco use in any form. Article 16, which focuses on protecting young people from access to tobacco products. And Article 12, the policy that is supported by effective public education and awareness efforts. And now there's the endgame policy, it's going out. We had the endgame conference, the first and the second US, and the first global one that took place in Dublin in June this year. And we have, you can actually look up Project Sunset and learn more about the endgame policies. So what makes this measure unique is that it shifts from age-based restrictions to lifelong prevention of initiation. It challenges the idea that there's a safe age to start smoking, and instead asks, why should anyone start at all? And actually, as an NGO, we went out and we talked to people, and we asked teenagers to interview people in a mall and ask them, at what age would you like your kids to start smoking? And I think people started realizing what they were saying when they were saying at 18. So I think it's a very important strategy. And but because it's very new, at this stage, there's no comprehensive pre and post evaluation for this policy. But the modeling studies provide strong indications of impact. In New Zealand, projections suggested the policy could significantly reduce the smoking rates within 15 years. In the United Kingdom, modeling shows long-term benefits over 30 years, including reduced healthcare costs, improved health outcomes, reduced inequalities, and increased economic productivity. But most importantly, the number of premature deaths avoided is expected to rise significantly over time, particularly after 2044. This policy is likely to be the most effective when implemented alongside other tobacco control measures rather than a standalone intervention. It represents a shift from managing tobacco use to preventing it across generations. One of the key strengths of this policy is that it creates no immediate disruption to retail environment, unlike more restrictive measures. It does not remove products overnight. It does not directly affect current adult smokers. Instead, it works gradually, shaping behavior over time. This makes it politically and socially more feasible to introduce while still being structurally transformative. At the same time, there are important implementation considerations. First, strong monitoring and enforcement systems are essential, as the policy depends on consistent compliance over time. Second, there is a risk of product shifting toward other tobacco or nicotine products or informal markets, which means this measure needs to be part of a comprehensive policy package, not a standalone intervention. In terms of impact, the potential is significant. This policy could substantially reduce initiation, particularly among young people. Over time, it would lead to a progressive decline in tobacco use across the population as the legal age effectively increases year after year. This is why it is often described as an endgame strategy, because it has the potential to phase out tobacco use across generations. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge that the impact is long-term and does not directly benefit current smokers, particularly older population. The second example I want to highlight is retail reduction, a measure that focuses on reducing the availability and visibility of tobacco products in communities. Retail reduction refers to reducing the number, density, and type of outlets where tobacco products can be sold. This can include limiting who can sell tobacco, creating buffer zones around schools and sensitive areas, capping the number of licenses issued, or requiring minimum distances between retailers. So rather than focusing only on demand, this measure directly reshapes the retail environment itself. There is strong evidence that higher density of tobacco retailers is associated with increased daily smoking, higher youth initiation, greater exposure to marketing, and lower success in quitting. The more available tobacco is, the more it's used. Therefore, retail reduction can significantly reduce tobacco availability, make enforcement easier with fewer outlets to monitor, and importantly, reduce the number of local tobacco industry allies. Fewer retailers means fewer actors with vested interest in opposing tobacco control policies. Next, please. Implementation considerations. The key point here that a small reduction is not enough. To have a measurable impact, reductions in retail outlets need to be substantive and strategically designed. Otherwise, the policy risks becoming symbolic rather than transformative. Retail reduction is supported by a large and consistent body of evidence. More tobacco retailing is clearly associated, as we said, with more initiation, difficulty quitting, marketing exposure, and worse health outcomes. What makes this measure particularly powerful is that it goes beyond individual behavior. It works by changing the social and physical environment in which tobacco use occurs. It has the potential to reduce normalization, limit exposure, and shift the conditions that sustain the tobacco epidemic. It doesn't just regulate tobacco, it changes the environment that makes tobacco use possible. And importantly, this is already being implemented in different forms across many countries, including those still strengthening core FCTC measures. The third example I want to highlight, and I worked on this one in particular, is the ban on cigarette filters, a measure that illustrates how forward-looking policies can address both product regulation and environmental harm. Removing filters would directly reduce the appeal of attractiveness and attractiveness of cigarettes, which aligns with Articles 9 and 10 of the Convention and their partial guidelines to product regulation. This is important because filters have long been used to shape consumer perception rather than reduce harm. Filters have been misleadingly marketed as making cigarettes safer, when in reality, there's no evidence that they reduce health risks. Banning them would eliminate the misperception of safety, prevent further product-based marketing deception, and also remove products like flavor capsule cigarettes, which increase appeal. Because unfiltered cigarettes are perceived as harsher and less satisfying, the removal could reduce initiation, limit progression to regular smoking, and potentially support cessation. Although it's important to note that there is no direct empirical evidence yet, but the conceptual basis is strong. This measure also has a clear link to Article 18, as recognized in COP10 decision FCTC/COP 1014. Plastic cigarette filters are unnecessary, avoidable, and problematic single-use plastics that are widely spread in the environment, killing microorganisms and marine life, as well as polluting oceans. So this is a measure that simultaneously targets product design, consumer perception, and environmental harm. As with other structural measures, implementation will require careful planning. There will likely be resistance from the tobacco industry, attempts to introduce alternative filters, such as biodegradable versions, which may still be misleading and will still leak toxic waste into the environment. To ensure the effectiveness of this measure, it should be supported by public education campaigns to correct long-standing misconceptions, cessation support, as product changes may influence quitting behavior, and surveillance systems to monitor market responses and changes in consumer behavior. A ban on cigarette filters has the potential to deliver both health and environmental benefits. It could reduce the appeal of smoking, address misleading product design, and significantly reduce plastic pollution and environmental damage. What makes this measure particularly important is that it reflects cross-policy integration, linking Articles 9 and 10, product regulation, with Article 18, environmental protection. It shows how forward-looking measures can expand tobacco control beyond health into environmental and sustainability agendas. As we've seen, the WHO FCTC provides a strong foundation for tobacco control, but it was never intended to be the endpoint. Article 2.1 reminds us that it is the floor, not a ceiling. Forward-looking measures represent an effort to go beyond implementation gaps of parties and begin addressing the structural drivers of the tobacco epidemic. Through the examples discussed, we can see a clear shift from controlling use to preventing initiation, from focusing on individual behavior to reshaping environments and markets, and from isolated policies to integrated cross-sector approaches. At the same time, one message remains critical. FLMs do not replace the FCTC Empower strategies. They complement and strengthen them, and both must move forward in parallel. The question is no longer whether we can imagine a tobacco endgame, but how ready we are to begin implementing. That's my final slide. Thank you very much. The takeaway is that the FCTC set the foundation. Forward-looking measures define how we finish the job. I would like to thank you for your attention. I would like to thank Dr. Jeffrey Fong for his support. And if you would like to read more on the FLMs, I provided 2 QR codes which you can scan in order to read more on them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful, Larissa Al-Uar. Thank you so much for your great presentation and sharing the work of the expert group. And I'm really thrilled that you were, you said a couple times how the FCTC is a floor and not a ceiling. And we have to remember now that we're in 2026, the FCTC, as you showed, was adopted in 2003. And one of the great things, it's an evidence-based treaty. It's based on the evidence. And it's the evidence at the time, like prior to 2003. And of course, over the past 2 decades, more evidence has been generated, and we know about other types of potential strategies and interventions. So just thank you so much for highlighting those points, and again for sharing the terrific work. So we have the Q&A open. If folks have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And maybe I'll start with a thank you for sharing the insider view on the work of the expert group. And a comment that there could be an opportunity at the next COP to revisit forward-looking measures. And in your opinion, what do you think should be the next action of the COP related to forward-looking measures?
The next COP, I mean, one of the articles that was discussed and that was postponed to the next COP was the one on harm reduction, Article 5.2b. And I think they are related because if you look at the forward-looking measures, they are comprehensive. There are many things in it, like when we talk about cigarette filter ban. And then we had the environmental Article 18, which actually also addresses the plastic from e-cigarettes. And now we have harm reduction and the definition of tobacco products, whether it is inclusive of e-cigarettes or not. So I think one of the things that needs to be done is working on expanding the definition. I know the COP might not be very happy with this idea, but I think we cannot anymore put categories. I mean, tobacco, it needs to be tobacco and nicotine products, and we need to implement the forward-looking measures also on the emerging products to make all these policies relevant and for them to have the desired impact. Because if we start regulating the tobacco products that were known 2003 and before, then we are missing out on a big chunk of products that are continuing addicting our youth. So I think we need to expand it further to include all tobacco products and nicotine products.
Great. Well, I can imagine that will engender a lot of discussion, but yeah, thank you for your strong voice on that issue. I wanted to ask about the prioritization of measures for the information briefs. And you showed how the group started with like a large number, I think around 40. It and did a couple of rounds of prioritization to end up with 16 key measures for which information briefs were prepared. Do you think there's room for the group to go back to some of the ones that didn't make it to the 16? And I don't know if you have any favorites of those or others that we should continue to keep sort of at top of mind.
I mean, when we prepared the long document, all 40 measures have been described. So, I mean, anybody can just go back to them and see what fits their situation best. So again, what we were saying, it's the floor. We just took a bunch of measures that were selected on basis how much information was there, how much are they globally applicable, what is the momentum for these things, how can we connect them with other measures. So it doesn't mean that when we choose X over Y, that X is better than Y. We just had to focus on a number of articles that we can discuss and write, else nobody would do it like this. The document is really long, but if we had all 40 of them, I think it was just not possible to have this in one document. But the supplementary documentation is there, and any party can go back and look what measures would suit their own country and implement it. Again, it's unlimited. The options are unlimited. Anybody can use anything.
Yeah, that's a really important point that you made, and I know it was a tremendous amount of work for the group in the time that you had, and to get everything ready in time for it to be in front of COP as well. So, just an incredible commitment of the expert group members. There is another question you talked about, Larissa. The FCTC deals with tobacco products. You talked about, being explicit about expanding it to include nicotine products as well. I'm wondering, and based on one of our audience questions, was there any discussion about cannabis?
No.
Not at all. I mean,
No,
it
no.
doesn't.
I can't give you the answer. No.
Okay, okay.
It was
Because it's often, I don't know, in some jurisdictions, also used by same people who are using nicotine and tobacco products, but of course the FCTC doesn't have jurisdiction over cannabis. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a quick answer because it
Yeah.
would just, no, I mean, we didn't discuss it because it's not within the mandate. We were looked at the mandate of the FCTC, and we were very careful to be within the guidelines that were provided.
Yeah. And terrific. And let me ask you, you've done so much work in Jordan, and you're sitting within the Eastern Mediterranean region. Are there some of these forward-looking measures that you feel are sort of the time is right? Let's focus on Jordan for the moment. Do you feel the time is right for any particular ones? Do they rise to the top for you?
Definitely, retail control is something that we've been working on, and as an NGO specifically, we have been working on. The laws are also already there, but they haven't been implemented. So we are working on them, and this was actually one of the things that convinced parties in the Eastern Mediterranean to accept forward-looking measures when we pointed out we are already implementing them. So we started with schools, now universities, because the law states within 250 meters of educational facilities and health facilities. So the government has become very strict about licensing, and because they couldn't revoke licenses as well, we also have licensing. This is another forward-looking measure. So not everybody can sell tobacco. You need to have a special license. And because they couldn't revoke the licenses that were already given out, so what they did, they're now implementing black curtains, so tobacco products cannot be seen by the consumer. They have to be displayed behind the black curtain. So actually, there are measures that can be implemented. One of the key things is that you need to put them in a framework. Even saying that these are forward-looking measures might not be attractive, but if you frame them in like child protection, this is something that is more acceptable by the community. So it is very important to find the window through which you want to address a certain law or to implement certain measures, is that you need to find what is most acceptable in that community. So if you tell them we will ban something for you, they don't like it, but framing them in child protection, and which is something that we are doing nonstop, really gets us public support. And when you have public support, the government will have to act. And I think this is the smart way to deal with things, not to be always confrontation. We confront them a lot, but sometimes find a way to gain support and move forward that way. Get what you want, just frame it differently.
Thank you. We've got a lot of kudos from the audience, and another question. You said that you contributed in particular to the work on filters, And the question is about how we can inform people better. And, there hasn't been much work on filters, cigarette filters. How can we inform people about their harm? Um, do you think, yeah, what more can we do on that topic at this time?
Filters is very important. First of all, as tobacco control community, we're not the only ones working on it. There are also the environmental groups that are working on it, and they're working more and more. Single-use plastics. I think there needs to be, first of all, education. I mean, one of the things that we did, and we did it maybe 10 years ago for the first time, we did a cleanup in a park with children, and we were collecting filters, and we showed them the filters there, and we were discussing why are they harmful, are they harming the animals, why littering, how they are unsightly. So we started sensitizing little children to them from an environmental aspect. But in general, filters can be discussed because there's lots of misconception about them. I remember my father telling me that these cigarettes are less harmful because they have a filter, and when you smoke, you see they turn brown in the middle. So this means they're filtering out the harms. So I've been exposed to the history of filters and how they convince the smokers to continue smoking. So these things, these misconceptions, they need to be addressed, how harmful they are, and how that lung cancer changed from one type to another type because of the use of filter, from squamous to adenocarcinoma. Then we need to address also how they are attractive to women, how they just mask the harm without being less harmful. I mean, looking at the harm reduction narrative of the industry, exposing is very important when we start with the filters, with the light, reduced tar, and now with the emerging products. It's the same story. So we need to just get the information out for people to have their aha moments, and then we can get the support. At the government level, we need the data to show the governments just how much they're spending on cleanups, because cleanups is a very important issue. Cigarette filters, 90% of them are disposed on the streets, in oceans, in forests. They are caused of forest fire. So, and also there's no clean way of getting rid of them. Even if you dispose of them rightfully, they're still an environmental hazard. And like today, now there's a talk about the lithium batteries in e-cigarettes and the fires that they cause. We need to address tobacco filters that way and get support from the environmental groups and work together hand in hand.
Great. I want to throw in one last very quick question. We're running out of time, but um, I wanted to ask about hookah from one of our audience members, and maybe we'll just limit it to the three, well, I guess two examples that you highlighted. So filters maybe not important, but in terms of tobacco-free generation and retail reduction, do you see like hookah being included? I guess the answer would be yes, but do you see like that there's like a likelihood of progress there?
It should be, because the problem with water pipes is that it was ignored too long at the global level. It was a problem of the Middle East. And now, as it's invading the US, Europe, people are realizing just how harmful they are. And it should be implemented in all products. It says tobacco products, and hookah is definitely a tobacco product. So we can implement it. It should be implemented. And the hookah is the problem of it. It's looked as a harmless way to spend your time, and this needs to change. Therefore, implementing it actually on these products would just show how harmful they are.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And Larissa Al-Uar, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Really appreciate all the work that you've done, and particularly sharing the results of the expert group and the process too. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.